welcome to another episode of Grow For It. We're here with Stephanie Sherwood, founder and CEO of the Tapestry Network. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Always love the opportunity to talk about, how God positions us. If we're talking about coaching, we're talking about marketplace, and I could sit here and talk about it for hours and hours and hours. And I was saying this the other day that, Billy Graham has said, and had said, he's passed, but, the marketplace would be the next greatest mission field. And so knowing that we get to go out and do and see and touch things that maybe the formal church can't do. So it is I feel it's a great honor to be called into the marketplace as a believer.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm excited to dive into that a little bit more. So can you tell me about how you got started in this world and how the Tapestry Network came around?
So it came around out of a personal need. I had been working for an organization similar to what we do, but not faith-based. And I had kind of hit a faith crisis and had kept a very large financial secret from my husband. I got found out, which is what was needed. I had been praying, God, make a way, let me find some. I was trying to keep a business afloat with credit cards. I don't recommend that. But God, in his goodness and his kindness and his graciousness, did what needed to be done, which was for me to be found out. And so in that process of that faith crisis, I had been away. I'd been out of state at the conference for the organization that I was working for. And when I came back, it was like, okay, I got to fix my relationship with God. I've got to get plugged back into church, and I've got to fix my marriage. And that was 17 or 18 years ago. I accepted Jesus as a little girl, never walked away from the faith, never walked away from my belief, but I didn't necessarily have like an active sold out for Jesus walk. So in that, went back, got plugged into church, went to Bible study for the very first time, was attending and then joined a mega church. And Tuesday night Bible study, there was about 1,200 of us, very, very large church. And so 98% of us were in the marketplace in some flavor, whether they were a service provider, a teacher, a lawyer, had their own business, whatever it was. And I learned very quickly in that environment for that particular church, I could talk about all the things. I could talk about, a bad marriage or a difficult child. I could talk about, obviously, if I was sick or knew somebody that was sick. And I could only talk about business if I was out of business, or unemployed. But we didn't talk about business. And I was struggling with the organization I had been working for. And as I fell in love with Jesus, I realized I couldn't go out into the marketplace and I couldn't talk about that. And then I was really struggling with my job. And so I was in what I thought was going to be somewhere safe to talk about what was going on with business. And I learned very quickly that those two they were like oil and water. And so I just started looking, and I started looking for something that would meet me where I was at. And I found a lot of really cool organizations that supported the Christian wife and the Christian mom. And I found a lot of organizations that supported C-suite guys, mainly guys, the token female, which I don't aspire to be that. If you do, that's great, but that's just not my cup of tea. And so it was just out of that, like, oh my gosh, there's got to be somewhere, and as I'm learning more about the Bible and I'm learning more about God and reading the creation story, we created, we did this, we did that. And I was like, gosh, if God is community, that's his essence, is he is community. It's three parts in one. And we're created in his image. Then we're not supposed to live fragmented lives, and we're not supposed to live in silos. We're not supposed to live, on our own. And it was just like out of frustration and tears streaming down my face, I sat down on my couch. It'll be 15 years ago this month. Sat down on my couch and just kind of diagrammed out, okay, God, what is this going to look like? And here we are 15 years later, getting ready to celebrate what we call a Tapiversary. So it was just out of my own personal need, which I think a lot of us do. We create things when we can't find what we need. So we get to co-create. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to find a need in the marketplace, is to find a need for yourself.
Yep. Yes, it is.
Congratulations on 15 years. That's very exciting. I'm sure your business looks a little bit different now from where you started. Can you kind of talk me through how it's grown over those 15 years?
Well, it hasn't necessarily grown in size, but it has grown in foundation. When I started this 15 years ago, I was really broken. And I didn't know quite how broken I was. And so I would recommend that nobody starts a business when they're angry. You make really bad decisions when you're angry. And so I was angry at the organization I had worked with and for. And I was like, well, I'm going to show them. I'm going to do it completely different. And you don't know what you don't know. I had owned a couple of other, small businesses. So I was familiar with like the general, how do you start a business, but had never run a membership-based organization before. And so I did it all backwards, 100% backwards. Really, by the grace of God, we still exist. It's been dicey a couple of times over the 15 years that we've been around. So what hasn't changed is our heart. And our heart is for Christian women entrepreneurs to know who they are and whose they are, that their calling into the marketplace is honorable, noble, and needed. That there's nothing wrong with being a woman that works. That's not everybody's calling. So I have dear friends that are stay-at-home moms, and they homeschool, they do all of the things. I quite honestly think their job is way harder than mine, and I respect them tremendously, and that's their calling for this season or this part of their life journey. I've always been called into the marketplace. That is just who I am. I've always built teams. I've always championed for others. That's my zone of genius. So that has not changed. The heart for a woman to know, her voice matters and her story matters. Foundationally, it's kind of the same. If it hadn't, we're definitely moving more into more so even now into a virtual membership than an in-person membership, because prior to COVID, everything we did was in person. We didn't do anything on the internet except send emails and make our website work. And so having to figure out the COVID landscape, some things we did well, some things we didn't do well, but it is like just through the fire, right? Just that refiner's fire of taking those things. And, so 15 years later, we look in a lot of ways very different, but the heart is still the same. That's
great. That's very important too. What would you say as far as your 15 years, what's been one of your proudest moments running your company so far?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I would say one of the most unexpected is just that women have come to accept Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior. Like when we set out, that was not like, oh, I'm going to go evangelize and, we're going to do that. But it's been really interesting. We were probably 7 or 8 months old when this one particular thing happened. And one of the girls that was one of our charter members, she's bebopping around the venue. We're at a country club getting ready to host an event. And she's like, so a guest was there and she's like, so how long have you guys been around? I haven't heard of you. And she's like, gosh, year and a half, maybe 2. And I'm like, no, we're barely 7 months old now. And so it's just always been like this, we call it the Tapestry way. We just do the way that God has done it. But that one particular event, I was getting ready, standing in front of the room facilitating, and I'd had my back to the room and I was looking at the vendor tables, and I turned around because they were doing this networking thing at their tables. And I caught a group praying, which not unusual in church or in a small group, but here we are at this marketplace networking thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I take the mic to my mouth. Oh my gosh, they're praying. We need to be quiet. And the whole room just got quiet. And I could tell who they were praying for because she was crying and nobody else was. And I walked over to the table and I laid my hand on her, and I had no idea what she had shared. But it's those sacred moments that have repeated themselves time after time after time, that there really is this safety in community. There is a safety. And so one of the things that was not a part of year one that has now become such an important part of who we are is that we heal and grow in community. And, guy or girl, we all have parts of our story that need to be healed. And I know sometimes we don't like to talk about, we're going to heal, heal and grow in community. But what's been so funny, not funny, haha, but just funny, is we've had a lot of women come into the organization over the years, and they're like, I don't trust women. I think women are jerks. I really don't want to do business with them, but I really don't have a choice. So I'm here kind of out of need, out of necessity, not because I want to be here. 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, they have built in the most beautiful relationships with women. And I think that's one of the things that has been just really cool, is to see just a lot of barriers being broken down. We're very counterculture. I would say in fact, I was on a Zoom call yesterday, and there was 2 girls that both were bookkeepers. And, we say this all the time. God doesn't set one of us up for success and one of us up for failure when he calls us to something similar, like bookkeeping. It's actually an example I use quite often. What culture tells us is, hey, Nathan, you're a bookkeeper. Hey, Stephanie, you're a bookkeeper. You better just try to go do everything that you can to take Nathan out of business, because that's what you do. And we're like, no, that's not what you do. That's not God honoring, and that's not the way God designed things. So it's like, okay, Nathan, let me sit down with you. Let me learn about you and what makes you get excited when you have clients. Because I bet you I've got some similarities, and I bet you I've got some things that make me unique, right? And so really teaching people that that's not a way that honors God. That's a way that honors self. So that would be a very long answer to your very short question.
That's a good answer, though. I know earlier you had mentioned one thing, that at the beginning you kind of felt like church and business, in a sense, were like mixing oil and water. But now it seems like you very much based your business around the opposite premise, that they go very much hand in hand. So can you talk to me about how you tie the two together that initially didn't seem to go together?
Well, it just, gosh, how did we just, it wasn't one of those things. It wasn't something I set out and my super smart brain said, this is what I'm going to do. It was just something that kind of happened. And what Nathan's referring to is we had a brief conversation before we hit the go live button. And I was telling him I had joined a church, and, 1,200 women, Tuesday night Bible study. We were all in the marketplace, and I learned very quickly that we only talked about business if we were looking for a job. We didn't talk about business in the way that, like, I have a coworker, or I have a boss, or I'm being asked to do something that it's not illegal, but it just doesn't seem like it's a high integrity or a high character. How do I overcome this? I need my job, right? I have a mortgage to pay and a car payment to pay. How do I manage that? And that was the situation that I was in. And then as I just, learned more about God and, going back to the creation story, and God's not fragmented. He doesn't live compartmentalized. He's like, oh, I don't hang out here just on Sunday, and I don't hang out here on Wednesday. Like, I am who I am. And in learning, going back to the creation story, it was like, I don't think he's created us to be compartmentalized. And that's what we do all the time. Like, okay, so, we've probably heard it or even said it, like you go and you do your church thing on Sunday, and then you go do your rest of your week. And then, you might go to Wednesday night something or some other thing. And then and for women, I can only speak from a woman's perspective, but, we always say, and kind of like a badge of honor, I wear all of these. I have my mom hat, and I have my wife hat, and I have my this hat, and I have my that hat. And I'm like, that gets confused. That's exhausting. That gets confusing. Like, what if I walk into the room and I've got the wrong hat on? How do I fix that? And so it's just kind of just out of that own need and that own necessity of just being, one of the things that we say is just be who God created you to be without apologizing for it. And so if he's, created you, Nathan, to be a coach and to be in the business community and to be a podcaster and, to do all of those things, then be all of those things. And, sometimes you have to kind of maneuver a little bit. Like I had a friend a while, this was years ago, and I said, we were having a very deep conversation, and I said, I am not a transaction. I'm not a transaction. I know that you do real estate and you are all about the transaction, but I'm a human. I'm not a transaction. I'm your friend, and I want to be treated like a friend. So there are times where we have to kind of morph, but I always respected her as a businesswoman. And so it's finding that blend where we can show up and still represent ourselves. And for me, it's always, how do I show Jesus? How do I walk into the room and let people know that Jesus, I'm walking in with Jesus. I'm not walking in by myself. And so that's, some of the things that we do. It just has become so second nature, and it's been really cool to watch women. I think most people will say God. Whether you believe in God or not, God is not like a scary word to say. A lot of people will say Jesus. History has proved, whether you agree how he got to planet Earth or not, history proves that there was a prophet named Jesus that walked on planet Earth. You start talking about Holy Spirit, and that's like, oh, that's a whole nother ball of wax. For a lot of people. And when we first started the organization, again, not where I was headed. I was like, I'm hacked off at the company I was working for, and so I'm going to do something different. That's really how it all started. But watching women fall in love with Jesus, watching them fall in love with Holy Spirit, and being able to talk about it and to see the ripple effect of what that looks like in their home, their church, their community, their business, where, we really don't separate. We don't separate the two, because that's not what he's asked us to do. So it's out of that reverence for God, that we show up, and we always know that Holy Spirit's there with us. So it's really cool.
That's great. I know you had mentioned earlier that COVID presented some challenges for your business, and really, I guess, was a catalyst for a lot of big changes within your business. Can you talk through that a little bit and how you evolved through that?
Yeah. So we started in Northern California, and we were celebrating our ninth tap anniversary, and we were actually one of the last live hosted events in Sacramento, California, before we actually had people in the room who were infected with COVID, didn't know it, right? So we did our event, and then the world shut down. And I have some really smart women that I get to hang out with. And, we were just starting to use Facebook, like to promote events, and, really COVID really pushed Facebook groups forward. That's where, you had nowhere else to show up. So we all kind of flocked to Facebook because that was what was there 6 years ago. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I'm like, okay, we got to do something. We've got to stay connected. Like, this is like, that was the first, 6 to 8 weeks was kind of scary. So it's like, what are we going to do? And so we started a Facebook group, and, there's our daily bread. And because we're the Tapestry Network, we're our daily thread. And so we started doing prayer Monday through Friday, different focuses. We prayed for the church, on Mondays. We prayed for business on Tuesday. We prayed for government on Wednesday. We prayed for business on Thursday, and we prayed for families on Friday. We did that consistently for about 2 years, and now we're down to just one time a week. And we've been meeting for almost 6 years now. Every Tuesday morning prayer, 8 a.m. Pacific time. So when we started our daily thread, then I was like, we need conversation. Like, it's great that we can all, show up and type something and laugh and, get a high five emoji or whatever. And so then I'm like, we're the Tapestry Network. Let's do Woven in Wednesdays. And so Woven in Wednesdays has led to, now it's Woven in Wednesdays, real conversation for real women. And we have had some of the most, like, I can't believe conversations, and that's where the healing and growing in community really came from. So we started talking, and we're still doing Woven in Wednesdays. We've talked about all the things. We've talked about divorce. We've talked about death. We've talked about murder. We've talked about rape. We've talked about pornography. We've talked about addiction. We've talked about all of these things that you just, are kind of like those taboo subjects, but through the lens of what does it mean as a Christian? What does it mean as a woman? And we have seen just miraculous things happen because we show up consistently and we have conversation. And so really, and then we did the hybrid thing for a while, and that was fairly successful. We're in Northern California. We were probably one of the groups that did that most successfully. And so now we do have members virtually in, other parts of the world and in the country, which is really exciting. And then with this reset that we're doing as we get ready to walk into the, celebrating our 15th year, walking into our 16th year, just doing a lot of different things to stay connected. So Soul Sister Saturday, if you're up at 7 a.m. on, again, Pacific time, and you want to roll into a Zoom square in your jammies, and you want to, talk about, again, some harder things and accountability and what does real life look like, because we are all about being authentic and transparent, and we celebrate together, we cry together, we laugh together. And if COVID hadn't happened, I think we would have just kind of been more surface, because that's kind of where the world was 6 years ago, is we were all just kind of on the surface doing the thing. So for us, it's allowed us to go deeper, to have more meaningful conversations, and to really position God where he needs to be, which is over everything, in the center of everything. And it just has given us a different lens to do life with. That's great. I know that you had mentioned a little bit about some of the challenges you faced along the way. What would you say is one of the biggest challenges for your business right now? Biggest challenge right now is it's been building So to answer that question, I've got to go backwards. So when I started the Tapestry Network, I had never run a membership-based organization. And so we just never set it up foundationally well. And so I would say the biggest struggle is I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to say, I don't know what I don't know, but sometimes you don't even know how to ask the question. And life is very different right now. So 15 years ago, there wasn't AI, there wasn't the social media, there wasn't the things that we have access to now. And not understanding, and like many people, having my own personal money struggles, not setting up that money foundation right, understanding that, profit first, all of those things that, I just didn't know. And so, and I did talk to really smart people before I started. Like, I didn't just say, oh, I'm going to just go do this and I'm just going to throw it out there. So, I did attempt to seek wise counsel. I did attempt to do those things, but I just foundationally just never got it quite right. And so God has been very gracious, because in theory and in reality, we should not exist. We shouldn't. We should not still be here getting ready to celebrate 15 years. We have made some, and when I say we, I mean I've made some really bad choices. I've made some really big mistakes over the years. But I think one of the things that we have done well is I will tell you that I have messed up, and I will own what I need to own. And I would say the other thing is not sticking to the vision, not sticking to what God gave me, has been an issue. Again, starting from a really broken place, it was hard so I clearly know what God told me. He was very almost audible in what he asked me to do, but in my own flesh and my own trying to be a people pleaser, to make everybody happy, I stepped away from the vision, and so now it's getting back to the vision. And you know what? It's okay if I don't make everybody happy. It's okay if I can't serve everybody. God made it very clear when we started this that we were an organization for entrepreneurs, and I based off a lot of feedback that I got from other people, because they wanted the Tapestry Network to be something that it wasn't. And so instead of starting their own thing, we tried to morph to make everybody happy. And so, sticking to your guns, even when it's hard, even when you've got a lot of chatter in your ear, it's really going back to being quiet and going back to vision and going back to mission, and being okay with everybody not being okay with you is needed. It's necessary, but it's not fun. It's hard. I'm not going to say that it hasn't been hard, because it's been hard, but we obey and we do what we should do, what we have been told to do. And so often, for a variety of reasons, we fight that. But again, God's been gracious. He's let us come back to the vision. He's let us come back to the original design. And so I am excited to see, where this all leads. Last year, clearly, the audible mantle, to touch the lives of 20 million women. Oh my gosh, where did that number just come from? 2 million women. God, are you trying to tell me something? To touch the lives of 2 million women by the end of 2030. Well, we're looking at, literally less than 5 years now. We're short by 7 days now. What does that look like? How do you even walk that out in real time? Because a touch isn't something that's necessarily tangible. We can obviously chart members, we can chart, people who show up for events. There's a lot of metrics that we can look at and tally mark next to it, but there's a lot that we can't. And so it's just trusting that mandate to touch the lives of 2 million women by the end of 2030 is a real thing. And it's exciting and it's scary. But we've seen it. We have 15 years of Ripple. We have 15 years of things happening and so many stories to tell over the last 15 years, and that ripple effect that continues to go out and on, from those stories.
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear that. I love to hear about the goal and just the impact that you're making already and shooting to continue to make. That's fantastic to hear. For those who aren't familiar, can you break down kind of the core pillars of your business? I know before we got on the recording, you had mentioned that coaching is a part of the business, but it's not everything. So I was wondering if you could break out the different sections for us.
So we are faith, life, and business. So we are obviously always a woman first. So you really got to work at get back to the identity of who you are and whose you are and understanding that. So that's the faith part of it. Then there's the life part of it, just doing life together, and I guess in essence, we're kind of like a lot of little mini small groups. And then there's the business part of it, and so it is a lot of teaching, a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring. When we first started the organization, we were actually called the BAM Project. And we hired some really smart people like at the end of year 2, and we rebranded. The Tapestry was always a part of the original language. And so we rebranded, and so we have been the Tapestry Network for 13 years now. Well, now we're bringing BAM, and so BAM stands for Beliefs, Authenticity, and Message. So again, if you don't believe who God is and believe what he says about you, it kind of messes everything up. The authenticity of understanding what does that look like and how I show up. And then the message part is, how do I message out what God's called me to do, whether that's a passion or a purpose or a business, whatever that looks like. And so really excited to bring that pillar back. And so that kind of stands in our faith and life pillar. And then we're launching something called the Life System, and the L, the I, the F, and the E all stand for something different, but really focused on taking that woman, that entrepreneur through her journey. And again, even when we've had very successful businesses, there's always going back and re-looking at things. So really looking at, what does marketing look like for a brand new company? What does marketing look like for an established business? How do I look at my numbers in a more meaningful way to make better business decisions? How do I look at my finances? Again, so we almost had to close the doors just in the last few months because we were not, be honest, we weren't doing those things well. Life happened. We moved. My father passed into glory. We've had life happens, and so if your foundation is strong enough, then your business foundation is strong enough that you can get through those life hurdles a little bit easier with a little bit more grace. We almost didn't survive, and that really made me be like, okay, God, what is it that you need us to do? So then the other things that we do is we do a lot of virtual events. So we have a community aspect that's free. You don't have to pay for that. And so we stream church on Sundays. I mentioned Soul Sister Saturdays. We do something called Taco Tuesday, which is where our coaches show up. So while I'm not like a coach, even though I do a lot of coaching and I do a lot of mentoring, we do have one of the arms, one of our pillars, which is called the Woven In Coaches. And so then they show up on Tuesday in a open forum talking about whatever it is that they coach around. We broadcast that on Facebook. And then one of the benefits of membership, depending on your membership level, is you get access to the coaches. And so you get laser coaching once a year from one coach, because we aren't meant to do life on our own. We are meant to, carry each other's burdens and carry each other forward. And then we do, where we have in-person events, we do live events, we do networking events. We do something called Woven in Wednesdays, where we do that online. We also do that in person. So there's a lot of, we're small, but ginormous all at the same time. So it's a pretty fun company to run.
I like that. That's awesome. I know you had mentioned one of the big changes nowadays is AI and automation. How do you view that impacting your business?
It hasn't, we haven't hit, AI hasn't hit us yet. Not to say that we don't use it, but we are not using, we use AI. I use AI, on a daily basis. We haven't built in yet some of the automation, but it definitely, I can tell you, if it wasn't for AI, we wouldn't have been able to rebuild the website. Being able, I don't know code, but ChatGPT or Gork knows code. And so, being able to use it in business ways has been very important. It's definitely helped with our marketing. It's helped with our messaging. It's definitely allowed us to move further, faster than we could have before. And it helps us layer. I love personally using AI to layer in scripture. So I can do a lot more things more quickly, more efficiently. And I never, ever, ever put something out that AI has written without me reviewing it, reading it, tweaking it. But, if I wanted to do a social media post every day on a different theme with scripture backing up the theme, that would have taken me, I have a learning disability, that would have taken me weeks to get 5 posts out. And so, we are using it that way, but it's not running any of our systems at this point. Not to say that it won't, but it's just not right now. So I see the value. I personally see the value in it. I know there's a lot of people, a lot of believers who don't see or understand AI. And I, was just talking to somebody who's probably going to come on and be one of our coaches. And she was like, and I said, yeah, I said, she's like, I don't do ChatGPT. And I said, do you ever know not what to have for dinner? She's like, I struggle with that all the time. I said, well, go look in your refrigerator, get the 6 ingredients that you have and ask Chat to make you a recipe. And she's like, you can do that? I'm like, yeah, you can. Or tell Chat you've got $50 and 5 hours. What's the best bang you can do with your doll? How can you make the $50 go the farthest in that 5-hour time frame? Plan a date for me. She's like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And I said, it's just like anything, it's our heart posture. And I can only imagine what computers really, we didn't get our first home computer until 96. 97. And so I can only imagine the conversations that people had about the internet and, all of that. And it's just like anything. You can use it for good or you can use it for evil. It's your heart posture. If I can get more gospel out using AI than I can myself, I'm going to raise my hand all day and say, yes, I'm going to use it. And I'm not going to apologize for using a tool to help spread the gospel. So that's my take on AI.
That's fantastic. I love that approach. The fact that like anything, it's just another tool and you can use it for great good, or you can use it for great evil. It all depends on how you decide to use it. And obviously there's going to be people out there that use it for both. But that's really, really cool to hear how you're using it for both spreading the gospel and also for very practical things like finding out what to eat for dinner. But I guess I'll leave you with one final question to wrap up here. What's one tip out there that you'd leave with our viewers? Maybe someone who's just starting out in their business, their entrepreneurial journey, something that you see that's a common misconception that you often confront.
I would say probably the biggest tip I could give somebody is go start with a bookkeeper. If you're not looking at your numbers, if you're not reviewing money, if you're not and I'm not saying that you have to go hire a bookkeeper, but go have a conversation, because there's so many online tools right now, and we think that that's bookkeeping, and that's just that's a facet of it. But if you don't understand how to pay yourself, I've been very blessed that I have a husband who's allowed, that the income that comes into our household has allowed me to do things a lot longer, go a lot farther than if I had been, an independent, living on my own. We would have imploded a long time ago financially, because I wasn't doing those things. So looking at your numbers, understanding your numbers, what does that look like? What does understanding profit, what does profit look like? How do you manage it? Like we just did our first price increase January 1st. We've been running the same level of service. We give more and we weren't charging anymore. And if you look at the cost of business now, this is our second price increase that we've done. I think we did our first one in between year 2 and year 3. So for 12 years, we've kept the same pricing, and everything costs more money. And if you deliver an excellent product, people will pay for that. But you have to understand, what does excellence look like? What will your market bear? There's certain things that you can do in Tennessee that you pay Tennessee dollar for, and there's certain things that you do in California and you pay California dollars. So really knowing your market, knowing where you're geographically located, looking at, not because they're a competitor, but it's data. Look at the data and make wise choices. And spend a lot of time in prayer and let God, really lead. But if you're not looking at money, you are really not running a business. And I did not run a business for about 13 years. You would say I had a hobby. And so just that would be my thing. Learn from that mistake. Run it as a business, not as a hobby. Unless you want a hobby, then go have a hobby. But if you want an entrepreneur and you want to run a business, you've got to, from the very, 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 very beginning, make numbers a priority.
Yeah, I love that. Again, a very practical tip. Thank you for sharing that. I guess finally, what's the best place for our viewers to find more information about you and how to tap into the Tapestry Network?
I love that. Just the tapestrynetwork.com is where you will find us. And on social media, I am most places Stephanie Morin Sherwood, and I only use my maiden name so that my high school friends can find me, because I moved away my junior year of high school. I am a very traditional. I love my husband. I love, the traditional roles that we hold in our household. I find that to be very valuable. And so I always want to tell people, again, your choice, you get to do you, but I value my husband. I gladly took his last name, very proud, to be a wife, to be a Mrs. Sherwood. And like I said, the Morin is just so high school friends could find me. So just like to clarify that.
Yeah.
I do. I love being a wife. I love being a wife, and I love doing the wifely things. I think that that's important. And, even though my calling is marketplace, I am a wife before I am an entrepreneur, and I hold all of those. I cherish those things that come along with being a wife.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today, Stephanie. It was great having you, and you shared a lot of great insights.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Nathan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to our viewers. If you found this valuable, please leave us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you here next time on another episode of Grow For It. Thank you.